Video. Has everyone got a seat? Everybody's upside down for some reason.
It's one way to
Yeah. That is so weird. Right, here we go. I'm just going to turn around. Yeah, super.
Oh, well done. There we go.
Okay. Super.
So very gentle.
Tell I'm in Brisbane.
So is that enough space?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, thank you all for coming. It is so exciting to have our first meeting in Brisbane with so many people. It's wonderful. And I'm going to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the Mianjin land where we work and live, pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders meeting with us today. Sovereignty was never ceded. It's always gets me. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't acknowledge that this is the land of the Turrbal and Jagera people of the Mianjin land. So thank you. Delighted you could come, and I'm sure all of you have been to have a little look at our website. I'm Chris Franks. I'm the founder and chair of Women in Aid and Development. And this is an organisation that has been going for 10 years now. We started in Sydney because there were a few people who wanted to get together. We get very siloed in our organisations. We don't get to meet. And I was also really aware from my work elsewhere in the corporate commercial sector, there was a lot of information around for women who were thinking about leadership, wanting to have a career where they were going to be able to make sure that we have gender equality in this sector. And I realised there's never any money in this sector. We know that. So it was a case of me bringing information that I had access to and putting a website together, and then we put Facebook together, and then we put LinkedIn up, and now we've got Instagram. So the aim is that we share information and we bring people together. We have meetings in now Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra, and first meeting tonight. And thank you to the International Development Network here, who've very generously partnered and helped us to put this event on tonight. And depending on what you say, because we will come back to you, we might come again and put it on our regular schedule, because bringing people together is the most important thing. We want women to learn from women and from generous men who also support us. And so each time we have 4 meetings a year, 4 rounds of meetings a year. We choose different topics that are of interest to people. And tonight we're talking about climate change in the aid, development and humanitarian context. And of course, it is the biggest challenge that we face. It is a challenge where we've already got 1.2% of warming. We're going to have 1.5 without a doubt, and we are on the way to 2 degrees unless there is major impact. We also know that this is something that impacts people in developing countries much more than it impacts us, and we take an uneven share of the resources and have an uneven impact on climate. International development, you're all here because I imagine most of you are involved in some climate programs in your organisations. And there's a whole range of people involved. So far, we've already met in Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra and online in the last 3 weeks. Every single session's been quite different because the type of people involved are all very different and come from a different perspective. It's going to impact every role in the sector. So there's no one able to sit back and go, well, I'll do my bit in finance. That role is going to be just as important as people on the front line. So we are here for a relaxed chat. You've already had quite a little chat. And we have got 3 fantastic speakers. And I'm really delighted that there are speakers from each area. So we have Dr. Anya Phelan from University of Queensland. We've got Eliza Smith from the Kaima Foundation, and we've got Laura Grubb from Palladium International. So 3 different organisations, all of them doing fantastic work in terms of climate. So plan for the evening, I'm going to just briefly introduce, then I'm going to ask Eliza, because she's closest to me, to start off. She'll talk a little bit about her work and her career, and we'll go across the speakers, and we're going to have plenty of questions. So please save up the questions. If there's one burning question at the end of each speaker, we'll take that one. But the aim will then be, after we've done this, that we will chat and talk some more and meet people, because that's the aim of the evening. Make new connections, find somebody who's looking for just you to join their organisation. But if you're their boss, don't tell them. All right, so Eliza is an ecologist, veterinarian and technical manager in monitoring, evaluation and logistics at Kaima Foundation, working to effect positive social, economic and environmental impact in marginalised communities globally. Laura Grubb, a senior associate at Palladium International, came from the agricultural sector, having managed farms and worked in the corporate red meat industry for over 10 years to drive value chain innovation. And Dr. Anya Phelan, a lecturer within the strategy and entrepreneurship discipline at UQ, also an entrepreneur in residence with the CSIRO Plastics Innovation Hub and Impact Initiatives Advisor for Blue Oceans Capital. Really quite varied and fascinating backgrounds. So over to Eliza. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me here tonight. Thank you for organising the event. It's so good to be here amongst Brisbane ladies. So I hope you don't mind. I'm going to use a bit of speaking notes here tonight, but I hope to make it engaging and give you a bit of a story of Kaima and my journey with Kaima. So I'm the technical manager and monitoring, evaluation and learning lead at Kaima, and I guess I would describe my journey with Kaima over the years, over about 7 years now, as contributing to growing the organisation, staying agile and trying to find local solutions for some of the most marginalised or underserved people globally, especially in a rapidly changing world. So my role has involved many things at Kaima. I've contributed to communications, fundraising, policy and procedure, strategic planning, DFAT accreditation through the NCP program, and more recently a focus on impact performance and impact assessment for the organisation. So I thought before I kind of give a little bit more information about Kaima, I give a bit of background to my career so far. And so I started out, as I said, with a veterinary career, and I also did ecology before veterinary science. So I dabbled in throughout my 20s in potentially the research, science communication career before starting my first professional full-time job as a veterinarian when I was 28 in Darwin. And I spent a couple of years there before heading over to Kenya and Uganda on the Australian Aid Program. So I was working with an organisation called the Livestock Research Institute, and I spent 2 or 3 years either side of my 30th birthday there, working on livestock development programs. I was a livestock research officer there. And then I settled back into Australia and spent most of my 30s working for CAIMA. So CAIMA was actually the Australian part organisation for the Australian Aid assignment. So I kind of transitioned as an intern, actually, starting with CAIMA and grew from there. So in terms of CAIMA and what we do, so we're an almost 20-year organisation now, and we're in a new strategic planning phase period for 21 to 26, and we're working to improve the health and prosperity of marginalised communities and their environments globally. And I guess we define, sometimes people ask, how do you define a marginalised community? We've got a fairly broad kind of definition in that we work with people who are at high risk of environmental, economic, and socio-political. So we, I guess, if I explain to the average person on the street what we do, really we work to tackle poverty, environmental degradation, and build better lives. And a strong part of our work is working in partnership. So we work with diverse implementing and funding partners, and core to our kind of vision is working with some partners to help kind of elevate local solutions that will help transform people's lives. So we work in 3 kind of key portfolio areas. So we support nutrition, health, and livelihoods, build resilient communities, and also that innovation and technologies. And we have recently established the Funds for Impact Initiative, which is we manage small grants, corporate grants, in particular Funds for Impact initiative, and that includes an Our Communities Fund, a Humanitarian Relief Fund, and a Challenge Fund, so Innovation Fund, which has just closed actually. For the 2020 year, I keep having to do my coding here. So after 19 years of volunteer leadership, we've our founding CEO, Celia Grenning, has just retired, and we're now being led by our new CEO, Anthony Carrigan, over there. And he's leading us through into the next phase of our organisation, which is really exciting. So in terms of the theme, climate adaptation, essentially, we have been working with communities on climate change initiatives and basic human resilience initiatives since inception, and we have had a focus on sustainable agriculture and food security. And this work has had a real specific focus on building nutrition, health, and livelihoods. Traditionally, we have worked with communities in Africa, and the specific communities we work with are rural communities, smallholder farming communities, particularly women and otherwise disadvantaged groups. So those people that are facing the absolute brunt of climate change and land use changes, they're often facing a double burden of malnutrition and high degree infectious disease rates. And for that matter, mental health issues. They're people often without land tenure, and they're people with poor market access opportunities as well. So they're also people, interestingly, without much, if any, livestock, which is kind of one of the keys to things like veterinarians. So our key work really is with livestock and improving people's lives through improving their livestock production. So in these particular settings where we work, livestock are, I guess, a marker of people's health, or sorry, wealth and status. And in particular, the very reason they were formed was to improve or to continue an improved model of village chicken and Newcastle disease control. So you might ask, why village chickens? Why that very unique focus? Well, really it is around the poorest of the poor chickens, and particularly women. They seem to be the livestock that women have some kind of power over. And in terms of Newcastle disease, it is incredibly the most common disease globally that affects chickens, and every year it wipes out entire flocks of chickens in villages. So it wipes out, food security and a source of, expendable income for those people that need it the most. So actually, with funding support from the Australian Centre of International Agricultural Research, or ACR, that's that group, one of our founding members actually developed a thermotolerant I2 vaccine, they call it, for Newcastle disease, which means that it can be used in these areas where there's very poor electricity and, next to no hope of any kind of strong vaccine value chain. So they actually found in early field testing of the vaccine that using a community vaccinator approach, when people were able to vaccinate their chickens using this vaccine, they were able to build their flock. They would often then eat and sell more chicken and eggs, and then build their nutrition and their income and general resilience over time. So with that very fact, with that early research, they looked to, especially when the aid cuts, the Australian aid cuts happened in the early 2000s, particularly in Africa, they decided to register HAMA as a not-for-profit to continue that work. So Palladium, or then GRM as it was known, actually helped us register and has been housed at Palladium in their offices and general IT support as such since then, since 2003. So it's really, our foundations really are public-private partnership. So a bit more about our kind of growth out of Africa into the Pacific. So although that improved animal health delivery and inclusive value chains work is core to our work in Africa and now in the Pacific as well, we've kind of moved into a broader scope of activities to support climate change action and resilience building in the Pacific. And today we work in PNG on a deeper ACP funded project, and we're also just started a climate resilient by nature program with World Wildlife Fund as well. And we're working with several public and private stakeholders throughout both PNG and Fiji to ultimately protect coastal ecosystems for improved food, nutrition and income security. So how that all started, we were kind of in 2016 with an organisation called Corals Conservation reached out to us. They're based in the Pacific and they're doing, Fiji, and they're doing work on coral reef restoration. And they kind of recognised Kayama's technical space in improved village poultry production. And they saw it as an accessible alternative protein source to fishing to kind of, I guess, protect coral reefs while communities are setting up locally managed marine areas and trying to set up no fish take zones as well. So the advantage of local birds in the Pacific, they're a bit of a dying breed, but they are, and that's what we're trying to do to actually maintain that genetics that in the valuable food resource that they represent, that they really are very resilient. They're low cost and they're not as expensive to keep as the commercial birds that are often kind of pushed throughout the Pacific for smallholder farmers. And they, unlike commercial birds that actually require importation of day-old chicks, they're very accessible to average rural farmer. So we're working with corals for conservation and partners in PNG to build that native chicken value chain, and in particular response to the fairly high rates of malnutrition, for example, in Papua New Guinea, with estimates suggesting that 48% of children under 5 are stunted due to protein and micronutrient deficiency. And at the same time, there being a high rate of adult obesity as well. So there's really a double burden of malnutrition, as we call it. So with a focus on sustainable agriculture and restored local food systems, including critical ecological systems, we're contributing to a wider nature-based solutions movement that I think is really building momentum at the moment. And our kind of ultimate goal is to build resilience in communities. So the specific project that we're working with through the WWF DFAT program is, as I said before, supporting coral reef ecosystem restoration, and we're supporting a growing evidence base for developing community-driven coral gardening techniques as an emergency response to mass coral bleaching. So this involves identifying more thermotolerant corals and species and genotypes in kind of inshore hot pocket reefs and outplanting them to further off reefs in cooler areas in the hope of kind of saving some biodiversity in the system. And we're working with both marine scientists who are trained in these methods and to conduct these experiments throughout different places in the Pacific, and also specific community leaders, in particularly Fiji and PNG, to set up coral gardening and set up village chicken production as an alternative on the side with community members, as well as planting mangrove habitats to ensure that the breeding habitats of fish are maintained and restored. So that's about it in terms of talking about what we're doing. I don't know if I've used up my time, but I think we can bring out, I was going to kind of go into some of the, I guess, challenges and things for our organisation growing as a small organisation to a bigger organisation, working with different corporate partners. But I think maybe we can talk about that in questions.
We can cover that questions. I think that is a really good and really interesting introduction. Yeah. Is there one burning question? Yeah.
So this seems like a weird question. It was very fascinating. Thank you for the talk. I really enjoyed it. When you talk about the native chickens, is that so? We have bush turkeys in Australia. Does that mean like in Papua New Guinea there's a native version of a chicken that you would then raise?
Not so much like bush turkey, but like the species that the domestic poultry evolved from, jungle fowl. It's I guess mix of the jungle fowl and domestic bird species, but it's a very kind of resilient, often a lot thinner and kind of gamey kind of bird. That doesn't require a lot of input in terms of feeds and decline, and it forages, scavenges often, and yeah, to put a huge amount into it, and small improvements in fees and things like that can make a dramatic difference in terms of production. So
I'd love to have a chat to you about how do we, farms make animals here to soften the impact on the environment, talk about climate science, kangaroos and bush turkeys maybe.
Sorry.
We've got a lot of options for you, haven't we?
well, there is the zoonotic disease issue that in terms of that strategy might need to be addressed.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. So over to Laura, the Senior Associate at Adaptation, working in the agricultural sector as well, brings a deep appreciation of the journey the food that people eat has taken. Moved to Palladium about 18 months ago, drawn by a keen interest in the Pacific, inspired by her PNG-born father, who spent half his life in the country. And now Laura's bringing companies nature-based solutions to the APAC region, work centred on fair and transparent value chains that serve to diversify farm income and deliver positive and sustainable environmental outcomes and strong positive social impact for communities. Over to you, Laura.
Oh, no. It's a bit earlier than that.
It'll wait.
Hi, my name's Laura. I've come here with probably one of the newer faces in the room, given I'm pretty new to international development. So I was born in WA, grew up in Broome, so yeah, got the resort lifestyle a little bit between that and dusty station life. So my family have been involved in ag and all facets, from commercial fishing to all different livestock, cropping, you name it, and I naturally followed that path. So I did animal science at uni down in Perth, kept going in that career because I absolutely loved it. So my minor was in meat science, and I found that really fascinating because it's such a complex environment. There is no A plus B equals C in meat science. It's every little impact can affect that steak in your plate or that chicken on your plate. So it could be the genetics that's going in 20 years prior. It could be nutrition. It could be the climate. It could be animal welfare. It could be the mood of that person handling those animals on that day. And I found that so fascinating. And I think that ability to look holistically at every problem and see that there's so many multifacets of what could impact this is really transferable to any industry and pretty much any problem. So I followed ag for many years. It took me to some amazing places, lived in North America, studying there, managing ranches, managing sale yards, having an absolute ball, doing all of the North American things. Came back and was managing a research project looking at meat science, it's a trend, on King Island, which was a really good excuse to eat a lot of good cheese. So that was, again, a really good choice in my life to do that one. I then made another really good choice, which was to head back to WA and manage a property just outside Margaret River. So it was really good to make your last paddock run on a Friday on the very south, which was right around the corner for our winery. So really unfortunate on that one as well. So made some really good choices early in life. And then packed my bags and went to Queensland chasing the big East Coast dream, which is a thing from WA. And the East Coast is so far away, right? I'm like, oh, they've got big cows over there. So I'm chasing the big cows. So I headed to Queensland in probably 2016, I think it would be, working for a large processor. So I came over as a livestock buyer, so I tripped around talking to producers all over Australia, choosing livestock, having a yarn about everything and learning about so many different agricultural systems. So it was really fascinating. And that really sparked my interest in what can we do to help people? Always got these questions like, well, what's so-and-so down the road doing? Or do they do it different in New South Wales? So got into the extension side, still working with the same company, but moved into the extension side. So, which I think is a relatively familiar term in ID. But helping producers adopt best practices, whether that be sustainability, biosecurity, how to improve their meat quality, a bit more of a trend there, and followed that. And that was really great, and I was really fascinated about different ways people could solve problems. Everyone has a different environment, a different system, different personal and business goals, because in Australia, most farmers are family farmers, not corporates. So they have their own goals, like whether it be, I want to earn enough so my kids can go to this boarding school so they can have the best outcome, or I need this because I want to buy extra land because I have 3 kids and I want them to have a parcel of land, or whatever it might be. And whilst if you haven't been in ag, some people may potentially have negative views on sustainability in agriculture, most of the things revolved around sustainability, about wanting to improve the land so it was in a better condition for the next generations. So it was a lot of that, and that inspired where I was going. Kind of got to a point in my career I had to either keep climbing the corporate ladder, and I did that for a little bit, but was didn't fit so well with me, and was having a chat to Dad, as you do. So you solve all my problems, your fatherly duties haven't disappeared. And he was like, oh, you know, I've got some mates in PNG and they work in agriculture. I thought, geez, that's pretty cool. I want to do that. So anyway, rolled in a master's of global development and quite quickly found out about Palladium and landed here. So now been with Palladium for 18 months, probably for the first year or so, very much a generalist, did all sorts of bids and projects, no matter what sector, nothing to do with agriculture at all. So I never had any idea what anyone was talking about. But it was a really good way to learn really quickly about different frameworks, different approaches, how the industry works, because it's a very different industry to agriculture. It was quite a culture shock coming in with the different acronyms and different terms, and when you just don't know anyone, it's a bit intimidating. So it was a really interesting career change partway through. And I really loved that, always with this ag bent of how could I apply this to that. And then got a really good opportunity at Palladium probably 4 or 5 months ago now. We have a nature-based solutions team, and they were looking at how could we expand this out. And obviously I'm sitting there going, I know how to do that. We can just partner with people who have properties. So anyway, managed to dog myself into that opportunity. So that's where I am today. And yeah, so Palladium, I think everyone here is probably pretty familiar with Palladium. Is there anyone that wants me to do a quick run over? They're relatively comfortable. Big organization, do a bunch of stuff. That's about what they do. So one portion of it is nature-based solutions. So we actually got followed into nature-based solutions through our economic development work, seeing where we could diversify incomes in different countries and for different communities, and often natural capital is a solution to that. So it was a really natural progression that way. We've been in the nature-based solutions area for about 8 years. So when it was still pretty new, been following that. Obviously, coming from the international development background, the company's always had a really strong social impact focus. So it's never just been, let's go protect trees or plant trees, or not just straight environmental based, but how can we empower the communities we're working within to make their lives better, provide them with their diversified income, improve their current livestock systems. How do we improve income generation so kids can go to school, or whatever it might be that they need. That's the framework Palladium comes in with, which is a point of difference when we're talking about other nature-based solutions companies, because they're very environment first, people second. So we come at completely the other way around. If it doesn't work for the community, we don't do it. We're not interested at all. And if anyone's had much to do with nature-based solutions, there's always been controversy over the years about how do you do it? Do you lock up land and community and conservation comes first, or do you focus on the other way? So we're very deliberate to coming from the social aspect and bringing a lot of the standard ID frameworks, such as safeguarding practices, good governance, those sort of things, which are really, really important in nature-based solutions, because often there is a significant power imbalance when we're talking about developing communities. We've got big corporations, we've got the Microsofts, the Bayers, the Mars coming in with, I have this much emissions, I'm going to pay you this much. And these communities, as with anyone, any of us in this room having those conversations, you don't know what questions to ask or how to protect yourselves or your peers. So Palladium plays a really important role in helping to facilitate that. So we have a model called developers of developers. So we come in, we don't want to be the developer, we don't want to do their job for them, because these people know their land, they know what it's capable of, and they are very, very capable people. So we're not here to teach them how to do their job, we're just here to help facilitate that interactions with big corporates and how that comes through, but also help them scale, because we've got small businesses, whether it be 1 or 2 man or a 10-man business, depending on where we're working. being able to help with that coaching and how do you scale up? How do you make this impact bigger? How do you put good governance frameworks in so it's fair trade principles? People are getting the money where they should be getting and it's not disappearing off the back channel somewhere. So that's kind of our role there, and that's taken off everywhere. We've had really good outcomes there. We've worked with big food organizations and making their value chain sustainable. So then identifying different communities around the globe and helping them to become very sustainable, helping them to market that sustainability as well, because people are often very sustainable, but they just don't know what that means or don't know how to sell that. So being able to facilitate that process and connect them up. And then being able to diversify that income with all sorts of different offsets, etc. So it's kind of value added, which is always brilliant. So yeah, this nature-based solutions space just keeps going. I think most people think of it just as carbon, but that's only one portion of it, that you can sell pretty much any sort of environmental outcome as long as you can put a value around it and it's measurable. So which is something that I think in international development, everyone is really good at. It's something I've never seen before, is how you monetize something which is quite intangible, right? How do you put a number on it? Whereas I'm really good at counting cows. I can tell you how much they're worth because I have a distinct market that I can tell you that. But being able in international development find these things and measure an impact on something that is really, really difficult to count and to describe to other people, I think is just a huge component of this. Which is where I think international development organizations such as Palladium and there's several others that do nature-based solutions bring in a really different value add to environmental groups. So yeah, we do a lot of that in developing countries, predominantly in the tropical belt. And I think it was 18 months ago, we got approached by the UK government to help them with their national parks. Their national parks are structured very differently to ours. They're not locked up bits of land that you can go walking through. They are working farms. So it's a very different model. We get to go in and actually work with landholders to look at how they can be more sustainable. How can they diversify their income? With Brexit, there was all sorts of issues with subsidies disappearing and whatnot. So people are really looking to do something different, which is really a license, I think, for a lot of producers to take that step. It's really scary to change the way you've been doing something for generations upon generations, but to kind of have this catalyst where your subsidies have disappeared, you're no longer very profitable, what can you do to change? So it's been really interesting to see the attitude change in the UK, and we've been able to come along and help facilitate that, bring in ecologists who can do all the assessments, bring in the economists who model up how that's going to impact their business and tell that story for them. This means that your kids and their kids can still have this farm. So it's a really interesting way of looking at it. And that was going brilliantly. We were growing, great team. We thought there's got to be more to it than that. So there was interest of doing it in APAC, and I'm the silly bugger that said, okay, let's do this. And now trying to get a rapid team around us at the moment to do that. We've got two different focuses here. We're kind of going for the developer model like we have in the UK, where we're the ones facilitating that development of nature-based solutions. And we're starting that with a really new market called reef credits, which is monetizing improvements in water quality outcomes in the Great Barrier Reef. So how can we get away from the current model, which is the federal and state governments handing out a bunch of money saying, please do something good with this, to let's turn this into a market, incentivize people to do good because they can make money out of it. So there's two different ways of looking at it, but I think in international development, there's a lot of cases where we've proven that's actually really effective and really, really sustainable. So it's very nascent stages, so I have no wonderful impact things to share with you, but come back hopefully in 2 years and I will. But we're also looking at different carbon solutions, for example. And there's another component of our business that also the cross barrier between the donor side and the MBS is coming together. So we got some work in several of our donor programs, which is just pushing this climate edge, and we're bringing in nature-based solutions. For example, we have an IPSP program all across Southeast Asia, and they're looking at blue carbon. So it's carbon production in water systems, or vice versa. It's a bit more technical than that, but don't ask me because I don't know the ins and outs of it. So we're working with that because we can see it's an opportunity to, again, diversify income in some of the most vulnerable communities when it comes to climate change, right? They're rapidly losing land, they're rapidly losing their ability to produce food and make an income. So how can we help them there? And if we can do that through nature-based solutions and use the materials around them but do it sustainably, they're not only helping climate change, but they're helping themselves by getting an income and I guess a future for their children. So there's really great opportunities, and I think we're seeing it more and more. I know Palladium, we run the climate change partnership, which is essentially a knowledge hub for DPAC projects that they can draw upon at any time on climate. So we've had lots of projects come in and use that facility to say, hey, we're doing, I don't know, education program or a health program. How can we think about climate change in the lens here? Or we have, this part of the community will suffer in the future. We can see it. We're already seeing the impacts now. How can you help? So it's really interesting perspective, I think, to work in, where you can reach out to all these different sectors, yet bring in this, I guess, market systems background and nature-based solution to that problem forward, so they can actually extrapolate that impact out. So I guess the moral of the story is all problems are pretty complex, and it's good to be able to step back and see all the different aspects. And nature-based solutions is one where I think it solves many, many problems if you can apply it properly with the appropriate frameworks, which ID can actually bring in because they work with that day in, day out. It's natural to us to do so. Yeah, nice and quick one for you.
Thank you very much. That's really, really interesting. Someone got a quick question for Laura? No worries, they'll come, don't worry. I was just going to say, who would ever have thought that UK farmers would be targeted and supported by an international development program, because they would not see themselves in that. So Dr. Anya Phelan, lecturer within strategy and entrepreneurship discipline at UQ Business Schools, with the CSIRO's Plastics Innovation Hub and the Blue Oceans Capital. Main interests are entrepreneurship and sustainable development, social impact, and the circular economy. Very interested in understanding how entrepreneurial action is helping to solve intractable social and environmental problems and different livelihood strategies in resource-deprived communities. Over to Anya.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Really nice to be here. It's a wonderful network and a really great context to get a lot of kindred spirits, like-minded people together. I am currently an academic. I wasn't always an academic. I started out my professional life as an engineer, but I was always really an anthropologist at heart. And I was particularly interested in international development and had an opportunity to reframe later in life after raising a family. And so I actually did my PhD in ecological economics, which I would say is the founding discipline for nature-based solutions. And if you guys aren't sure what that is, it's totally because a lot of folks, it's been kind of that the term gets used a lot, but a lot of folks don't know what it is. So we can chat about it later if you like. It's actually a little bit more complex. The framework comes from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and it's a wonderful, wonderful set of principles. But I shifted fully into sustainable development because that was something I was always interested in, starting from my early 20s, and when I reframed into academia, it was kind of the logical progression. The thing with engineering is fantastic, but you get pigeonholed mostly into resource projects, energy, large energy type of multinational companies. So with the work that I do now, I focus primarily and just kind of worked out that way. I was had a postdoctoral research fellowship role that was based in Indonesia and the Philippines, and we were looking to strengthen coastal management in remote coastal communities in the Coral Triangle, which is one of the most marine diverse areas in the world that is susceptible to a whole number of challenges, including effects of climate change, high population density, and other strains on the marine and coastal ecosystems there. And we were working, I was working on sustainable livelihoods and looking at opportunities through entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, developing small-scale enterprises with communities to support and protect coastal ecosystems. And we did really extraordinary projects, many projects, and trainings, and then linked up with partnerships and worked really closely with not just the local government and local communities, but also organizations like the Indonesian Institute of Sciences and some of the organization at the University of the Philippines as well. And what was interesting is that when you're in Southeast Asia, I just, you know, I've kind of ecological and, like I said, ecological economics and sustainability background. It was impossible not to see the key, what I felt was kind of this kind of continuous and consistent wicked problem, or these intractable problems that was there, and which was marine plastic pollution and plastic debris. And it was absolutely everyone, some of the most remote communities that we worked in, which was predominantly around, if you're familiar with Indonesia, it would have been right in central and east, so South Sulawesi, we were in South East Sulawesi, Maluku's, I worked in Sumba, places like Sumbawa, which is near Lombok, and West Papua. And where we went in that plastic and marine debris, plastic marine debris was absolutely everywhere, including in uninhabited islands. Indonesia is incredibly complex geography. It's got nearly 18,000 islands, and it's this extraordinary, beautiful archipelago, but with very huge area that's coastal. The majority of the population lives along the coast, and this what I felt was this constant. This was something that it was just it's very confronting. It's very visceral. Plastic pollution, in my opinion, is just the other side of climate change. It comes from the same source. It's just the other side of the coin, essentially. And developing countries, most of us know this, are really the ones who are on the front lines and who are bearing the brunt of certainly the effects of climate change, but also the impacts of ocean plastic. And they're seeing it from a number and numerous factors, including the formal and the informal waste trade that's coming in from developing countries. They're seeing it from the incessant, basically producers and manufacturers who keep expanding into low-income markets as Western markets or developing country demographics are moving away from processed and instant food. A lot of it is being directed towards emerging economies. And as we're dealing with the SDG of reducing poverty and improving the standard of living, we're definitely having a massive negative impact on the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal of life underwater, number 14. So SDGs are kind of complex. I use system dynamics or systems thinking in a lot of my research. So you realize that everything is connected and one thing has an effect on the other. So anyway, plastic pollution, particularly in remote regions in developing countries, became the focus of my research. And so I look at it from a number of perspectives, mostly social science based. So how does it, what is the impact on livelihood? What is the impact on health? But also how we use this approach called mental models. So understanding how the communities that are right on the shorelines of this continuous issue that is coming in through seasonal monsoons, that's coming in through very linear supply chains, that's coming in through the waste trade, how's it impacting them and how do they see this world, this phenomenon. So we use this thing called mental models and identifying the factors and drivers, but also then pathways towards solutions. Sometimes through innovation, sometimes through social enterprises model. Sometimes nothing can work without the policy legislative frameworks around it. But it's something that is certainly not going away and keeps exponentially increasing, sadly, and it requires all different disciplines to address it. So that was quite a bit of my focus in terms of my actual research. Right before the pandemic happened, and then you can actually travel to all these areas where I was doing field work, and so I did quite a bit. I shifted to really looking at the companies and the food and beverage sector and the fast moving consumer goods sector, and we formed a team and actually addressed how did this very extensive systematic review to see how are they addressing plastic pollution in developing countries, specifically in regions that lack waste management infrastructure. Short punchline of that is they really aren't, and there's a lot of huge commitments, and we all know the focus on the circular economy and a lot of transitioning towards the circular economy, but actions are very different to commitments, and are certainly the top 10 fast moving consumer good companies and food and beverage companies are they continue with doing what they're doing. The recycling is still the go-to, and the focus is predominantly on post-consumer beach cleanup, behavioral science, education, that type of stuff, as opposed to solutions at the source, such as refillable models, alternative materials, and so on. So that's kind of the bad news. The good news, there's a lot of great stuff and innovation happening. For example, we just launched at UQ a massive training center that will be going for 5 years. It's through the Australian Research Council. And we have in lots of industry partners, including the Minderoo Foundation, some of you might know. And it's a training center focused specifically on bioplastics and biocomposites, but in this incredibly holistic, sustainable way that is certainly looking at biopolymers, but also what is realistically the compostable reality of such product, and truly the most strongest sustainable approach. So again, trying to, through, a little bit, some of it is just through innovation, some of it's through radical innovation, trying to shift and move the dial. And then I'm really excited. I have a new project that recently came through, and it's in the outback this time. It's up in the Cape York Peninsula, but in the coastal areas of Cape York. We'll be working with 2 communities, and so they're in 2 indigenous councils that on innovative recycling solutions through ideally the social enterprise model. And there's a whole roadmap in place, and we're hoping that we can scale and then take these findings, these learnings to other remote communities in Outback that are also struggling with recycling, which by the way doesn't exist anywhere west of, I want to say Toowoomba, but really maybe a little bit further, maybe even, like definitely there's nothing west of Rocky. It's just the distances are prohibitive and things are complex. So to know, again, it just is, but it requires innovation, and it requires bringing, I think, local people together, because I'm a firm believer that no one really knows how to address certainly complex issues more than the people on the ground. And so we're about to launch this work in Cape York, which I'm really looking forward to. I think that's it. Oh, and the work with Sara is really neat. I'm embedded in their accelerator program. So we are working with entrepreneurial teams one in a group of teams in Indonesia and a group of teams in Vietnam, and they're all local entrepreneurs who are developing solutions to combat plastic pollution from different perspectives, everything from kind of more IT based to working with the informal sector, or they call them waste pickers, and empowering the informal sector to recycling nappies, which I found strange solution. They're doing that, but it's actually really it's very inspiring. The number of, and these are proper startups. They're early day startups. They're all nascent entrepreneurs, but very passionate, very dedicated to dealing with this issue of plastic, which is super cool.
Thank you very much. Strikes me that everybody's got programs around water and programs around local communities. In fact, you could label all of the things that everyone's doing as entrepreneurial in some way. It's getting local communities for their own solutions, which is the best way. Fantastic. Time for some questions. And I'm sure that there are a few out there.
Thank you to the three of you. I'm deeply inspired. So glad I came tonight, and just feel like I have some future connections and kindred spirits in the work that we all do. Obviously, I just have a question for you. In your training centre that you spoke about, in the value chain of that setup, do you have any incentives for women in STEM students, university students, to come and embed in your program, particularly from Indigenous cultures?
Yeah, look, it's such a great question. The training center just launched, and it's an so the Australian Research Council has these they have these schemes. So this is under the linkage scheme, which requires this very close connection to industry partners, and it's specifically focused on training basically future research science. So it's PhDs and postdoctoral research fellows does that, and this center is logically it sits and is led by our School of Chemical Engineering. So I say all this to answer your question. I'm sure there is, but exactly how, because it's just launched, so how they have planned to incorporate that. But I think it's almost an inherent now aspect of pretty much all initiatives. I'm using that as like the underlying assumption, because, for example, so much has shifted, and really just in the last, I want to say 3-4 years. Whereas I'm at the business school, so I'm one of the chief investigators for the social impact team, but I suspect they would have incorporated some of that, definitely built it into the roadmap. But for example, at the business school, we are, and it's the largest school at the University of Queensland. We're now actively working to indigenize our curriculum. So I teach social entrepreneurship and strategies for business sustainability and innovation, and both of my courses are now being. I'm working with Indigenous scholars who we're shifting and transitioning, so it is now not only highlights Indigenous knowledge, but is now accessible to Indigenous communities, but also Indigenous Australians. And so I think yes, but I can't say for sure, only because there's been a turn for the better, definitely for the better, where it's become not an afterthought, but a priority.
Yeah, I'm actually a graduate of the business school at DQ, which I did my master's there because I needed a piece of paper for my work. But when I did it, I just loved it, and
that's so good.
But have you heard of the program called Career Trackers, which is a voluntary organisation that's set up to support and mentor Indigenous students through their study.
Right.
and they've got a program in PNG, which is where I work.
Oh, wow, that's.
But I don't want to hold the floor, but I just wanted to make a comment because I know there's a few engineering STEM people here. I just came from the transport sector under Australian Aid, and I've just moved to UN, and I'm a big advocate for developing women, and in every single job we advertised in engineering and transport, we never got one female applicant. And in the UN, you have to have 50% of applicants female, or you can't progress. And I've just started at the UN, and today I was trying to navigate how we can get some people on the ground, because we just advertised for an electrical engineer and we didn't get any female applicants. And this is the UN that advertises globally.
Yeah, that's. They recruited QTs or something. But yeah, no, that's, I hear you. When I graduated in my bachelor's in engineering back a gazillion years ago, there was 11 females in our class of 400.
Yeah, well, I worked with career trackers because through Australian Aid, I used to work for GHD, and we sponsored career trackers to promote STEM students. And so I said, we'll support you if you only give us female interns. And so we got 4 STEM female interns through the university system in PNG, and they were the only engineering students in the whole program.
Wow.
So
How many STEM folks here? That would say, yeah.
One thing that that I found is with these events, they're all very different. So our online event very much focused on the Pacific, and there's a new group in the Pacific called, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's like Women Engineers in the Pacific or something similar. And they are now getting together to network.
oh, that'd be great.
Melbourne event was all engineering, and that's definitely a very strong thing that's come through. So I'm more than happy to put you in touch with some
That'd be
people who
great,
might
'cause
be.
Yeah, we reached out to the Institute of Engineers in Australia to try and get them to advertise our jobs, and particularly their women's part of that program, and they didn't respond.
EWB, Engineers Without Borders.
No, it was the Institute of Engineers.
But EWB might be interested.
Yeah.
But have grab me after. and
Yeah,
I'll
thank you.
just take the details. Yeah, very good.
BWB is represented.
Yay.
Great.
Fantastic. I've done
Very
some
easy connection.
Oh,
Question? That's what happens. That's what happens when you reach for a glass of wine.
I had a question for Laura. Earlier you spoke around reef credits.
yes.
I was wondering if you could just explain what that is, and also where the Palladium's actually then looked at enhancing it as a program up in Cape York and for Indigenous communities as a source of income.
Yeah, so reef credits, it's all about improving water quality. There's multiple ways you can do that. There's currently 3 approved methods, well, 2 and a half approved method that will be approved soon. So there's one which is reducing nitrogen runoff, which is focusing on banana and cane plantations because they apply a lot of nitrogen. It's a crop that's very thirsty, but it's improving practices around that. So that's very much a practice change method as opposed to an infrastructure change method. The other one is Gully Restorations. That's reducing sediment runoff out of gullies, which is generally because there's been bad land management practice over time and the ground erodes, and we need to come in and fix that. There's multiple ways you can do it. Fix it far more down the engineering track than it is in practice change. So it's you fence off the area, whack in a bunch of trees and rocks and all sorts of things that technical people who isn't me know how to do. And that reduces the runoff. And there's a third one which is about to come through, which is wetlands. So it's improving wetland management, so re-wetting them to stop nitrogen runoff. So that's just catchment and filtration system before it goes into the catchment area. So they're the 3 different methods currently. I'm sure there'll be new methods put out in the future, but they're the current ones at the moment.
Who's financing the credit? finance?
Who's financing?
Like, how does that system work?
Yep, so how it works is, so the landholder provides the land currently in most models. The project developer, like most nature-based solutions groups, come along with the capital and develop this project and sell the credit. So we as Palladium will be the developer in this situation. We will work with investors who are got a bit more of that social environmental impact focus and really want to see good be done. Obviously, they're still going to get an economic return out of this. They're not completely philanthropic in their actions. So they come along and provide with capital to be able to do that. We then sell these credits, the same as a carbon credit, right? It monetizes a unit of sediment or nitrogen. It represents it just like you would carbon, and you're able to sell that. So there's two markets. There's a compliance market, so those that are causing damage to the environment that potentially they need to, I guess, compensate for, like they do with carbon credits. And then there's the more altruistic voluntary market, which those that have a great love of the Great Barrier Reef or associated with it, whether that might be tourism. It could be surfwear companies, those that see that as a really good thing that they want to be able to say, we support the Great Barrier Reef, and they buy this credit. So that's the current model.
So it's like either impact investors or like philanthropists.
Yes.
Yeah.
Predominantly impact investing. You can still make money out of these things.
Just a quick follow-up. How does the recouping of the money sort of work in that instance? That's really interesting that it's obviously impact investment, you get a bit of a return. How does that work?
Yeah, so they get a return. So that one's just on a, depending on what the agreement is with them, an 8 or a 12% return on their money. And we sell the credits for X% more than it costs to produce it. So we have agreements with our landholders, which is quite similar to most developers in nature-based solutions, where we actually give the landholder the vast majority of the share of the profit because it's incentivizing them to keep going, right? Incentivizing to keep up the good land management practices and I guess compensate them for the fact that a portion of their land can't actually be used for agricultural production. So there's a component of that. And then the other part covers our costs and give us a little bit of cream on top, so that way we can move forward and keep chasing new projects. No, you're right. Did I answer all of your
First
questions?
question, the second part of it was around the Indigenous communities.
Yes.
Plans that want to go back to country and then be able to have a source of income to allow their likely plan to go back.
Yes. So
Is that an avenue or revenue source, and is that something that is a program?
yes, we're definitely looking at that, and we're trying to work out what the different ways we can touch points with TOs is, whether that be capacity building, because in that particular region we're working the southern end of the catchment. It's high density and not necessarily working on their land, but working in neighbouring lands, where we can bring in and upskill in earth moving equipment, etc. Because there's a lot of small businesses owned by TOs in that area, in that space. So how can we get them into this market, which is booming, and it's going to be really hard to keep up with the scale of earthworks equipment required in the Gully Restoration. Our partner in this is Group of University, so they're the technical experts, and they actually work in communities in Cape York, actually teaching them how to do Gully restoration on their own properties. They've done that previous to reef credits market being formed, so we're hoping to partner with them to then bring reef credits to them. So we kind of just come in as the capacity building, how to do it, right? We'll come in with the knowledge, you come in with the local know-how, let's marry it up and turn this into a market system, right? So if you have any ideas of who we can talk to keep that facilitation going, we've only got so many networks ourselves within our current partnership. But yeah, I'd love to hear if you've got any other ideas, that would be amazing.
Certainly one of the things I was listening to yesterday, I was at a climate governance conference, and there the market for offsets is going to absolutely expand immensely over the next few years. So all of you are working in areas that sound as if they are opportunities for communities to develop and become sustainable, at the same time as helping big polluters and companies that are in transition from being very non-climate change friendly to being climate change friendly. So, and over the next 40 years, that's going to be a massive need transform overnight. And a lot of these things will have a lot of money going into them in terms of companies who desperately will be looking for where they can buy an offset while they're transitioning.
Particularly through healthy soils. So really regenerating and working closely with farmers to allow the carbon sink that healthy soils provide and it's optimal. That's absolutely the real future, which is wonderful. It's so positive. Questions?
I have a cynical question. Slightly cynical question. If large corporations are buying, you know what my question is.
No.
If large corporations are buying credits to offset bad behaviour, is there an incentive built into credit sales that is there a commitment from the company that they have to change their behaviour over time, and it's not just a get out of jail free card?
That's a great
Yeah.
question.
Like because it's a system issue.
Yeah. It is. And it's a, I guess a fundamental issue that the whole MBS market is grappling with at the moment is who do you work with, and are they doing it for the right reasons? Are they doing it because government said you have to do it and offset what you're doing, and they actually have no intention of improving their environmental outcomes? Or are they doing it because, as Chris said, it's because they can't quite improve everything that they're doing? There's still going to be a portion that they're going to have to offset, so there's an opportunity there for someone else to be able to change that. It's, I think, a never-ending issue in this space of who we work with and the different governance frameworks that every country and every state, particularly in Australia, is working under. So what they're actually liable to prove that they're changing, which we're seeing a lot more in the carbon space, is they're actually having to show that they're making different changes. Not necessarily in Australia, but they'll get that. The actual prove that they're moving towards a net zero, they're putting in place caps. So there's an international cap and trade system in emissions, which is actually reduces every year. So the amount that they can, emissions they can produce before they have to then go buy offsets reduces every year. So they're having to buy more and more offsets, become very, very expensive for them. A role that Palladium wants to play in this, and we've got a few partners that we're working with at the moment, is how do you drive the credit prices of any nature-based solutions up to the point where you're disincentivizing bad economic outcomes, but you're actually improving also the returns to those that are doing the hard work for the emitters, right? Or the people doing land degradation. So we've actually got this kind of other arm happening at the moment, is working with a group of traders and brokers in the nature-based solutions area to drive that price up. The way we're doing that is bringing in these social impact outcomes because they sell really well. People are very concerned. There's been, I'm sure everyone's heard of debacles about cheap carbon credits, and turned out that it wasn't actually doing anything, or been counted 10 times. Companies are really conscious about, probably discussion yesterday at the company directors forum was all about high quality credits. How can you prove that that credit is actually doing what it says and isn't negatively impacting either the environment or the community or whatever it is? So those credits are selling for, at the moment, about 3 times the price of just a standard carbon credit. So we can do that to any credit that we're producing, be carbon, be water, be whatever it is. We can add in these social impact and whatever it is that we want to monetize. There's also endangered species additions you can add onto them. It's protecting a special great species of parrot, for example.
The metrics need to be backed up.
The metrics,
They need to be backed up. There needs to be industry to bring her onto it. Yeah, absolutely. And because we still actually don't have an official carbon price. We have an approximate one out there. And it's so interesting what you're saying, that it varies to the quality of the credits. You're not just planting monocrop of tree farms, which don't do anything, right? So it's actually looking for measurable, proper carbon sinks. But that's it's really good that there's so much effort.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think it's great we've been able with the social impact of actually literally brought out frameworks from ID and put them in nature-based solutions, because that's the only place it's really being measured properly, and it's repeatable and it's being checked, and it's good governance around it. So we need to do that across several other of these other co-benefits, right? Which at the moment be a little bit wishy-washy in how they're being measured. So
Is everybody
Yeah.
comfortable with, like, nature-based solution is a confusing term. A lot of, like, it's thrown the ladder. Is everybody?
I'd like an explanation.
Yeah, no, I think it's worth it. No, because I think it's, look, and I'll give it a go and then we'll just all go down the line. But it's essentially, it's a framework. It did emerge from ecological environmental scientists who work on valuing ecosystem services or the benefits that nature provides to us for free. And the idea of a nature-based solution is that it's applying ways that nature would address a natural infrastructure, and the caveat, it has to address a societal challenge, and it has to be in full consensus of the community, the local community, the respect around all the cultural and traditional requirements there. But it's there's a whole set of very, very strict principles. But an example of a nature-based solution is, for example, in an area that experiences a storm surge, planting mangrove forest to protect from the erosion, or applying regenerative farming techniques that would use, without chemicals, that would use the processes in nature would use to address a degrade, it has to be regenerative by design. So I missed probably quite a bit.
no, I think that's pretty good. I think that's the heart of what it's designed to be. Unfortunately, when these things go out, the definition gets a little bit looser. So unfortunately, not everything is always entrenched in that the social impact of it initially, and included in that framework is kind of lent a little bit more now to the environmental side, and we're kind of trying to pull it back and realize it's actually that holistic approach. to
If anyone's
environmental
curious, you can actually just type it in, you go to IUCN, and they have this wonderful interactive website that describes it. And it's supposed to be super, super strict in terms of, right? But you're spot on. If people are just like, we do nature-based solutions, and you know what that actually means, it remains to be seen. But it's a good idea.
Question for you. I don't know how much interaction you've had with particular landholders in the UK, but have you noticed any kind of significant differences between landholders in the UK and Australia in terms of how they're responding to solutions?
I think the only real difference I'm hearing from the teams, obviously I'm not interacting with them on a day-to-day basis, is the level of urgency. I think developing communities are seeing the everyday impacts of climate change now, and they're far more keyed into that, just because that's their culture, right? They're often far more connected to what the changes in the environment versus those of us who are in a bit more of a man-made environment, even if it is a natural situation. So I think it's a difference in that urgency to act, and therefore what are the solutions being nature-based solutions, versus UK where it's a lot more initially economic driven versus being always just that environmental first. So it's I mean, different places it's different drivers.
Same in Australia as well. Australia.
Yeah, there's same sort of probably a little bit more on the urgency front, because we do have a lot more of that varying environmental impact on our properties. So we have a lot of droughts, a lot of floods in this past 5 years, when we've had this really perfect storm of this crazy drought, and now all these floods, which has caused devastation. We're seeing a lot of people coming and asking, like I'm getting a lot of my peers coming and asking, what are you doing? They hear about this nature-based solutions, like I need a solution to this, I can't do this again. Maybe with this latest bout of heat in the UK, there might be a little bit more urgency to see what can we do to stop this happening again. But I think unless you're impacted personally and can attribute that to being a climatic impact, which people don't necessarily do, I think there's less of an urgency to act, and therefore put in place nature-based solutions.
I think to the end of the formal part, and we're going to open up soon so you can all network and grab the speakers. But I want to ask all the speakers one thing. It's one of the reasons we're here is their work and climate change, but it's also a little bit of inspiration because they're all doing amazing work. You're all doing amazing work. And I just want to ask one question, which is, in your career, you've all moved, you all started somewhere and you've gone through a whole range of different places and you've ended up in probably a whole different spot from where you thought you might. In that career trajectory, because that's the same for all of us, we all start somewhere and end up in a job we never knew existed quite often. What was the thing that helped you most in your career to get from, you know, the day you left school, expecting to do something, be a vet, you know, be an engineer? So, Anya.
The one thing.
Well, if there's 2 or 3 things, but what were the things that really helped your career to go forward? Because everybody in the room can relate to probably the same sort of thing.
Yeah. For me, it was a series of unfulfilling roles and jobs, and again in the technical field, that really prompted me just to really be completely honest and go, what do you truly want? What do you want to be doing? And I left engineering, and it pays really well, I have to say. And then I became a PhD student, which is like, does not pay well. With 3 kids as an adult, it was super daunting. You start from the beginning. Academia is so hierarchical. You just like, it doesn't matter what you did before, you're nobody when you start. But it was so, I guess my answer is just, you got to go completely to first principles and be super, super authentic and just go, what really makes my heart sing and where do I really want to be? And despite that really was the best professional decision I've ever made, was to go, oh gosh, I never liked any of these roles, because I always had to work on some mining project, and I could, or oil and gas. I went from like a series of oil and gas and mining, and I hated all of them, and I'm like, I want to do sustainability, and this is completely not being true to myself. So it's so cliche, but I would say totally follow your heart and your passion, 100%.
Sounds great. We know, Laura, that your father helped you in deciding where you were going. What are the things that helped in your?
Well, I think that's probably an example of one, right? I think I've had a lot of different opportunities, and I know personally, and I know this is an issue for women, you doubt yourself, like I couldn't possibly do that. Like imposter syndrome really is sitting on tapping you on the shoulder. One of the best bits of advice I got was at uni, talking to a mentor of mine. And she said, if someone else that you trust believes you can do it, you can do it. So if you trust that person, so not anyone, you don't want to make a stranger down the street and say they can do it, but people that you trust, if they think you can do it, then you can, because they see you in a different light to what you see yourself. So that's always helped me when I've gone, I can't possibly do that. We're going, oh, this person, whether it be my dad saying, of course you can have a big career change before you're 30, like that isn't such a crazy idea. Sometimes you just have to go, yeah, no, that's right. They can see that this is possible, and it's not all going to end in tears. I mean, sometimes there's some tears along the way, but I think you just got to kind of put your own self-doubt aside, and if someone else believes you can, then just give it a crack.
Right. Liza.
I think it would be for me overrunning in veterinary science, the 7 years that I spent studying and then being a vet, just in terms of vets are really just like problem solvers. And it's the kind of most broad life sciences kind of degree I think you can do. Many people would think that, but the kind of breadth of different things that you learn throughout the veterinary career, and just I guess just taking opportunities. And I mean, with Kaima, I came back from working as a livestock research scientist to fixing their website and doing their social media, because I was the youngest by about 20 years and they needed that. So
So yeah, so just jumping in and taking on in a different role and learning how to do things, on the job.
Well, I think that's really good advice too, because for lots of people, this is an incredibly competitive sector to get into, whether it's managing contractors, academia, not-for-profits. It's everybody wants to work in it because it is incredibly values driven. You do want to do some good, you want to have an impact. And I think that that it's really important for us to be inspired by people like you, and for us all to think about the opportunities that are out there. How can you show that you're committed? How can you show that you'll go the extra mile? How can you show that you will do more and get that next job? And so I encourage everybody to think about that. And if you feel that you're not quite sure, then come and talk to me any day. I'll inspire you to take that next step, or any of the other people in women in development too. So I want to thank you all very much for what you have done today, and we want to say thank you with our traditional gift that is being modelled here by Julie, the Women in Aid and Development Month, only available for speakers. So we want you to have it on your desk and show everybody, but can we all say thank you? Now, I want to also say a couple of thank yous. Thank you to AJ for helping to get this going, and Anya, for so many people, especially Alessia Anabaldi, who's not able to be here tonight, but the Queensland International Development Network for sharing that we were doing this, for everyone for sharing through your networks. We really appreciate being here, and I want to thank everybody for coming along. As I said before, we hold events, Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra. We've been doing those for a long time. We're happy to come back and do some more here if you'd like us to. We'll come and ask you if you'd like that. Our October event will be on new technologies in the aid, development and humanitarian sector. And I did note, Joe, that there are lots of engineers and STEM people in the room. So obviously there's a whole group of speakers that we could grab. But we also do online events, so you're always welcome to join those. The organisation exists because we have members, so encourage you to be members. Encourage your organisation to become a member. It's incredibly cheap. Thank you, AJ, for taking in Kaima Foundation today. I saw that come through. It's lovely to have you as a member, and there are benefits through organisational membership for staff. We have a mentoring program, and that's our biggest program because people really want to have a bit of guidance to get through the sector. We're just about to launch our August program. So if you're interested, you need to be a member. If you're a student, you don't have to. You can just come into our small group mentoring, which is really a great way for when you're right at the beginning of your career, and we do that at a small charge. We need some new mentors. So if anyone here has an interest in helping someone else, you don't need to be a CEO and you don't need to be a senior something, because if you finished a degree at UQ or QUT, you know how to get through that process, and you could help somebody who's just going into that process. So everybody can help everybody else. And our aim is always to get women helping women and men helping women. Always. We always need volunteers. So if we are going to come back, then we would love a couple of people to help. It's not difficult. You have to give people wine. You have to make sure they eat something. You have to give them a name badge. And so from that point of view, again, thank you for coming. Don't run away home because there's still wine to drink. Before you do go, leave your name badges at the door for me. But the other thing I'd say is whoever you came with tonight and whoever you've already talked to, take a big step and go and talk to somebody you've never met before and say hello to them and make a new connection. because networking is just about being brave and saying hello and knowing that the person that you're saying hello to is probably even more scared than you are. So make some new friends.
Chris, can I just add something?
Sure.
I'd like everyone to join me in a round of applause for Chris because she works so hard in doing what she does for WiAD, and she is relentless in her vision for helping women tonight. So please join me in supporting.
Julie, my wonderful one volunteer in Brisbane. We're going to have lots of volunteers. Thank you. Enjoy. We'll get some more wine and hopefully see you again.
Thank you very much.
Hello. How are you?
It's nice to meet you in person.